So next up we have Robert Baugh, who will present Gulf Coast Oyster Recycling and Restoration. And Robert is the Chief Operating Officer of the Chiles Group and is responsible for the daily administration and operation of the various businesses under the Chiles Group umbrella. Robert, welcome and take it away, sir.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Bear with me. I am not an academic, and I am very nervous up here. I'm just a food and beverage guy. We're going to talk a little bit about oyster recycling, shell recycling, and how that all came about. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about how this initiated. In food and beverage and hospitality, you folks at home, we buy our waste. And as I continue to run 3 very large businesses, I look at how I can mitigate that waste. We look at single stream recycling, we look at composting, we look at less water, packaging, and plastics. But in a seafood restaurant, we bring in a lot of product, and the oyster shells came to mind. And through a partnership with Tampa Bay Estuary Program, START, Solutions to Avoid Red Tide, I presented this idea, and you want to talk about grassroots and low-key. What if we took all our oyster and clam shells and put them somewhere and dried them for a little while and bagged them and went out and replanted the reefs? And somebody asked me, well, why do we need to replant the reefs? What are you talking about? We buy our oysters from Chesapeake Bay, we buy them from Cedar Key, we buy them sometimes from Oak Hill, we buy them from Washington State. Well, there used to be a lot of oysters here. For folks that have been around for a long time, the Manatee River used to be called the Oyster River. Hundreds of millions of tons of shell were pulled out of the rivers and estuaries all down the Gulf of Mexico for roadbed and for construction materials starting back in the 1800s. I don't know that it's coincidental that we started having reports of red tide back in the 1800s after this material was pulled out. So not to give you an education on what clams and oysters do, but just to tell you a little bit about how we decided to do this project. I wanted to take my shell that normally we'd be put into dumpsters and trash cans and put into the landfill, and I wanted to stop that and mitigate the waste that I was buying. So we got together and had a conversation again with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Mary Ann in the back wrote a great grant for us and allowed us to obtain some money so that we could buy a simple trailer, landscape trailer. I got some bins, I took them to the 3 restaurants, and I taught my team how to recycle their clam and oyster shells. The idea here was that we were going to take these and make a commodity out of them. Right now, oyster shell is mined. It's either bought from processing houses, and we were, again, throwing stuff away. So we thought, why don't we take this and make a commodity, process it ourselves, look at volunteers to help, go ahead and bag it, put it out, and start restoring our natural resource in the area. We wanted to incorporate some research. The Gulf Coast, our Gulf Shellfish Institute, Dr. Barber put together some studies to determine simple things like, is this going to be viable? Should we really go ahead and spend our time planting and going through this exercise? It turns out, and again, I'm not an academic, but taking our shell that we recycle versus mined is 19% more apt to get the larvae and the spat and grow oysters for us. So to me, that's a win-win. We're already 20% ahead of the game. Some of the research includes tests on red tide. And again, I'm not an academic, but what we're hearing is that clams are going to eat tens of millions of specks, or whatever the measurement is, of this red tide organism. If you don't know about START, again, START, Solutions to Avoid Red Tide. I'm not going to go in. You've got folks can read here and understand what's going on. Pardon me, I'm a little bit nervous. It's funny, I can talk to people in a restaurant all day long, but not up here. We put together a partnership team, right? It was just going to be me, and I'm this knucklehead that's going to drive my Suburban, and I'm going to take the shells, but Mary Ann said, hey, we've got to get the right people on board. So we got some nonprofits with the Shellfish Institute, the government, the Manatee County Parks and Recreations, for profit. I'm in the business for Ed Chiles to make money, right? So we all got together, and that's something that's really important, that it's not one entity, that we need help from everyone. Talks about education, what entity did. Again, we're moving shell. We're creating showing the value of this product. We're finding research with fresh versus fossil effectiveness. Talked about the vehicle. The 37,000 pounds was the amount that was collected at our first bagging. We're up to about 70,000 pounds of shell. We've had 815 students come out with adults and do workshops. And it's so interesting to see people come out and get in and start bagging the shell. They start to do exercise programs with it. And you want to talk about community, that's what this is about. This is about tying things together. So again, it's not about academics and numbers. It's about getting people out and involved and doing the right thing. How we communicated, which is a big component, was we did tabletop cards, posters, and flyers. So in my restaurants, you'll come in, you'll hear all about what's going on with the recycling and restoration. Again, we had the workshops, we had members of the public, we did press releases. I'm sure somebody in here saw something about this crazy nut that's doing this oyster recycling up the road. Now we're to the point that we're going to scale this up. Through Mary Ann, through Sandy Gilbert at START, we're negotiating with Waste Pro and Waste Management to add restaurants. Phase 2 will be 10 restaurants. These restaurants are going to pay a small fee to have the shells picked up and taken away. That is a contribution that they may not necessarily see value in. It's a lot easier to put it right into the dumpster. It goes right to the landfill. We are working on some initiatives to maybe 25 cents out of every dozen oysters you buy, or 50 cents contributes to this fund. And then the entity that's picking up the shells gets to take it and hand it over and go, here, you get to have it for free. And then we're not mining any longer. Talked about some of the research I talked about earlier. I think the biggest thing to take away from this is that it seems that it's more effective to take this recycled shell instead of mining shell. The larvae seems to be more apt to attach to it. Oysters grow by attaching to calcium, the smallest speck you can imagine. Shells are calcium. Oysters, their life is all about filtering water, just like clams, right? So they're filtering the negative bacteria, they're taking the nitrogen out, and they're putting that inside their shells. Oyster is a wonderful product besides being an aphrodisiac, right? There's other things. Now, we could stop right there, but it does a lot of other things. It can filter, an oyster can filter 50 gallons of water a day, a clam 25. We need our water filtered here, right? The program is all about taking this resource, getting cleaner water, erosion prevention, mitigating what we put into our landfill. Talks about intertidal, I don't even know what that means anymore. That's it, guys.
Great job, Robert.